Hello and welcome to this episode of How Round Is Your Rugby? Today I am joined with Manjeet Dhokia, who is a culturally sensitive therapist. So first of all, I want to say, isn't it just great that we are recognizing that people from different backgrounds and communities can be supported by people who understand their culture and background? It's not always a prerequisite in therapy, but I have found personally that it cuts out a lot of explaining when someone just gets why things are hard for you. It's one of the main reasons that I coach South Asian women because I wanted to see that support myself. And secondly, therapy in itself was something that when I was growing up, we would not talk openly about. Someone's mental health conditions, they were sort of sidelined or brushed under the carpet. So it would be interesting to see and hear from Manjeet's perspective what, if anything, has changed over the past few years. So thank you so much for joining me, Manjeet, and getting into this topic with me. So since you've been a therapist, have you seen a change within the South Asian community on mental health, or is it still very much a taboo topic? What's been your experience so far?
Hi, Priya. Thank you for having me on your wonderful How Round Is Your Rugby podcast. I will tell you a story about how round my rugby is later on. But I have seen a definite difference in how mental health is approached in the South Asian community. I've noticed differences in how my own family have sort of approached the subject. I will say that my mum still struggles to explain to others what I do. She doesn't seem to get the initial, I can't just say to her, I'm a therapist. I've had to go into a real big spiel about what it involves and so on and so forth. And at one point, I remember laughing, saying, she was like, so it's people come to you for duksuk. Have you heard of duksuk? Yeah, sort of, Mum, but I work them through their processes that give them their duksuk, I suppose, if you like. So that's been quite interesting with her. I am definitely seeing a lot more South Asians approaching me, mainly South Asian women approaching me for culturally sensitive therapy. I think it does make a difference. And not always a prerequisite, like you said. It does make a difference in terms of how you can find a therapist who can be a bit more culturally sensitive in terms of some of the things that you've grown up with. And I think looking at my own journey, I've definitely learned a lot about myself in terms of the two cultures, living in a dominant culture, being very much a part of a collectivist culture, and that my own journey has definitely inspired me more to reach out to South Asians. I unfortunately don't get very many referrals from men at this particular moment. And if I do, very much men, South Asian men between their 20s and 30s. So still not very much the older generations, but women definitely, and women sort of from the age of 30 to 50. I am noticing that sometimes we have I offer an initial consultation, which is just a chat for someone to have a conversation with me, see if I'm okay to work with for them and I can offer them what they need. I think there's still, how do I want to put it? I think there's still a sort of that taking that step, so the initial call was fine and then I might not hear from them. So I do still experience a lot of that. What I do notice is younger South Asians approaching therapy because it's available in schools up here in Scotland. Each school has a counsellor to work with the teens. And so I do get quite a few referrals within the schools. They still don't see very many South Asian therapists, but it has been quite beneficial in some of the clients I've worked with in my particular school. So I would still say that I personally feel we've still got a long way to go. I still personally feel we've got a long way to go because I think when we look at therapy in terms of the South Asian perspective, we're battling with a lot of conditions. We're battling with a lot of intergenerational trauma. We're also battling a lot of acculturation gaps as well between parents and children of immigrants and then grandchildren of immigrants. So the gaps get bigger and then the conditioning is very, very different depending on those gaps as well. So that's where I feel we are at the moment.
I mean, that's just a lot to cover right there.
It is, isn't it?
A few things I want to pick up on. That difference, you mentioned earlier, that collective culture. And I think this is where I see my clients struggle as well. And from my experience, that we may go to work And when
Mhm.
you're in a Western country, it's quite an individualistic culture. It's, you put yourself forward. What do you want from life? And in coaching as well, I encourage people to think about what goals do you want to achieve? How are you going to make yourself happy? But in our families, we're brought up in a very collectivist culture. It's about thinking about the family needs. And everyone's got their place. It's a hierarchy. And sometimes it's a woman as well, have that conflict between, oh, but this is what I want to do, but then also this is what I'm expected to do in the family. And a friction can sometimes generate there. Have you seen women with those kinds of experiences? Or, what would you say to someone who's trying to balance in between those two cultures?
Well, that's a really good point, and I think a very valid point as well with regards to South Asian specifically, South Asian women specifically, in terms of straddling the two cultures. Because yes, they enter a world outside of their doors, especially in the UK, and I can only speak from a UK perspective. It's going outside the doors, you're immersed in an individualistic culture. It's all about self-promotion, it's all about confidence and self-esteem, and then you go back behind closed doors and you're almost living two lives. I would essentially, you could probably be living about four in terms of the different areas that you.
Yeah, everyone's got different expectations.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I think that that's not appreciated enough when it comes to South Asian women, because actually that's the sort of stuff that makes us the powerhouses that we are. All those different roles that we navigate on a daily basis, because sometimes we want to. Sometimes that's part of our cultural conditioning as well. And sometimes some of those things suit us. During my counseling journey, I kind of went through this very phase of, why is it always about the other? Why is my care and my attention always about somebody else? Why do other people come before me? It was always that way. And I think as South Asian women, we are conditioned that way from probably birth, and not to mention our own women, our own elders being conditioned that way as well. So it was a real big learning curve, actually, because this is going to sound very crazy, but I love the feeling I get from cooking for my family and watching them enjoy the food. And I had to really unpack it in terms of, it's a very simple thing, but I wanted to unpack it. Very simple thing that I really get this bubble of love in my tummy when I see my husband and my children enjoy my food. It's very, very straightforward. Do I want to stop that? No, I don't. That can be a part of me. Also, yes, it's part of my cultural conditioning, but however, I feel a part of me. So it's just like kind of unpacking. And I guess when I speak to clients, what we tend to do is meet people where they're at. I meet them with unconditional positive regard to some of the concerns that they might be facing. And what we do with those things is unpack them, because I don't want to sit in a place where I'm pulling people away from their culture, because I think our culture very much makes us the people we are today. Our experiences, it very much makes us the people we are, and how we manage to navigate. I think one thing you'll probably have noticed in your particular line of work is how adaptable South Asian people are. Yeah, exactly.
Switch to different environments. I see women that were very good at that.
Yeah, women and men and children. I mean, my children are not afraid if we have to pack up and move. They're not afraid at all. Where you might hear from certain individualistic cultures that the kids are terrified of moving the schools and moving an area and all that kind of stuff. My kids are like, yeah, okay, where are we going? Where's next? Sort of thing. Because as you can tell, I'm not from Scotland. We moved up here. So thinking about what somebody might say in terms of how to navigate those particular environments is unpacking just those particular things that are of concern to you, not unpacking everything, because otherwise we're stripping everything back. We're stripping everything back, and suddenly we're struggling with that identity again. We're struggling with that identity that we've kind of formed all over our lives, and different identities, like I said, in terms of 4 identities, 5 identities. But it's picking those particular things that concern us and don't sit well with us, and we can find are making us unhappy.
And I find that those changes happen at certain life moments.
Yes.
Big life changes, going away to university, discovering that separation, if you were able to, from parents. Some of us were able to move away, some of us weren't, but it's still a life change of being more independent, I think, at that stage when you're 18. And going into the world of work, a big one for me was getting married. Was one of the biggest changes, both in moving houses, moving in with another family, getting to know a whole new family and who you are in that space. And then also having your first child. I think being a mother brought up a lot. In terms of therapy, I think I spoke to someone recently that the episode's coming out about having children and what that does to us mentally, physically. At that time for me, it brought up a lot of things from the past. I don't know what it is about that change, but it was like a complete, I'd say regeneration for some reason, but a complete change in think about who I am, who I was, who I want to be. I spiraled during that time. I had a difficult time after my first, but again, it's that process, I think, of just recognizing where I am, what I need to keep, what needs to change. And I think a lot of women go through those big life changes, and if they haven't got the support around them, people to talk to, people to understand, we can really struggle. So, like we said earlier about South Asian women seeking help, just want to make it normal. But support is there for when you need it.
Absolutely. I think that's so important, Bria. The support is there. And I feel like, I've been a therapist for now, well, let me see, 5 years. Yes, 5 years, 4 years, 4 years. I'm considering I've been on the journey for a lot longer, because actually one of the hardest parts of being a therapist is my own journey. I can sit with clients and I can absorb and we can work, and I absolutely adore each and every one of my clients. I've grown with each and every one of them, especially the hundreds of teens I've seen over the past 4 years. So that was one of the things that really made me grow. And it's really important to understand that like you said, the support is there for Asian women. And I feel like that's exactly what I was born to do. That it's my calling. I'm so gutted that it's come to me in my 40s, but it really feels so natural to be able to sit with someone and really unpack all these years and sometimes generations of conditioning. And when you talk about the parenting, yes, that was a massive change for me as well. I often tell my female clients that if that is something in their future in terms of having children and so on, you'd be surprised to know that it's actually not something on a lot of young women's radar. It's something that they're actually not interested in at all. Is very much the younger women not interested in at all in terms of having children. But it is it's a massive change in us, isn't it? As women, it's a massive change because we're responsible for someone else. But also, I think it gives us, it's almost like a light bulb goes on in terms of, this is how I was parented. Do I want the same for my child?
Exactly. Yeah.
Do I want the same? Yeah. Absolutely. And it's almost like nobody asks us, it's almost like this question just comes up as soon as as soon as we sort of decide to have a baby and we go through the pregnancy and stuff. And it reminds me, and that's something else I work very, very sensitively with my South Asian clients, is that you may have found this, that what's the word I'm looking for? Any sort of thought process behind my parents could be the reason for why I'm navigating this particular issue in my life unhealthily is because of them. And people then think of blame. And that's not what it's about, because our parents did phenomenal things to get us where we are in the best way they knew possible. Now, I'm not saying all parents, but I am saying that the majority, it can be really difficult. And I found this, especially with South Asian clients, is that the approach to some of the ways our parents might have conditioned us is really sensitive to approach, really sensitive, because they feel like they're blaming. They feel like they're pointing a finger. And that's not what it's about at all, because they had a blueprint. They had a way of parenting. They then moved to another country where they're surrounded by people who parent differently. And obviously TV and what have you, in terms of other information outlets that people use for parenting. And then they have us, and we go out and we start to learn, gosh, we don't actually see anything particularly different about our parenting in the house, but we go out and we think, oh gosh, they're being allowed out until 7, 8 o'clock at night. Why is that not the same for me? That this has grown up in the 80s, 90s. So it's really sensitive to approach that. And I try my best to do that very gently with my clients, because I think that can be really painful. And it's not that we go to blame. It's all we're doing is creating an awareness around something that our parents may have done that we don't want to carry on doing, but we're navigating unhealthily in our particular lives. And it reminds me of something Maya Angelou said in terms of do the best you can, but when you know better, do better. And I think that's what we do as South Asian women at a particular age, at a particular time in our lives.
And I think it's just actually that question of what do I want to change? Where I think when I think back to my mom's generation, maybe they didn't have that thinking because it's about preserving the culture and we're just going to do what our parents did. And for many years, it would have been the same. But coming to this country, and perhaps it's a privilege of our generation where we can afford to make some changes. We've got a bit more independence. We're educated perhaps differently, that we can make those changes. Like I said, it's understanding what happened before. They did the best that they could. And that takes a journey as well in itself, I think, to understand.
Absolutely.
And once you're in that space, okay, what's possible for me? And that is a privilege to be able to make those changes as well. You spoke earlier about this term intergenerational trauma. For someone who doesn't know that term, what's that? Could you understand what that is?
So it's a massive field of study, and I'm no scientist. I very much work with people and sit with their pain and concerns. It's something I've noticed and learned about myself in terms of my own journey. There's a whole study of epigenetics about how our genes and how the expressions of those genes change. And then once those expressions on those genes have changed, they get filtered down through the generations. So a particular example might be a pregnant female, a pregnant mum who is particularly stressed at that particular time. I think we all know what high levels of cortisol do to our bodies. And then when we're pregnant, those cortisol are being passed down to the baby as well. And that can change the expression of those genes and how they then cope with stresses later on in life. Mental health concerns. I really don't like to use the word disorders, but we'll stick to mental health concerns and anything that might show up, the PTS that might show up later on in life and so on. We're looking at, I'm sounding like I'm doing the research myself. I'm not. They are looking at Holocaust survivors, slavery, ancestry, and all sorts, and noticing how those expressions in those genes have filtered down through the generations. In terms of the South Asian culture where I was looking, was very much that stress of moving to another country, and then being pregnant and the stress that cortisol being transferred through to the baby. And then we look at attachment when the baby's born as well, the attachment styles that you might experience. We've already talked about collectivist cultures. In India, it's very much it takes a village. I'm a big believer of that. It takes a village. We do need to root together to help our teens. They're very close to my heart at the moment. And so that sort of, they've been pulled away from that, all of a sudden navigating an environment. That's where these communities sort of grouped together when South Asians moved to the UK. They sort of grouped together to find that village, didn't they? They really did. But if you think about those sorts of expressions of genes changing for the children, the kids were born into environments where, and we don't know what each and every environment was like behind closed doors, because if one thing South Asians like to do is not air their dirty laundry. Yeah. So we don't know what was going on behind closed doors. And sometimes because of those stresses, the parents, the caregivers, anybody in that particular house might find maladaptive ways of parenting, maladaptive ways of coping. Again, don't blame, because they were just doing the best they can in an environment that wasn't really catered for them. It wasn't really designed for them, And so that's the sort of thing what I'm talking about in terms of intergenerational trauma. And actually, I'm not just actually saying that in terms of a South Asian perspective. What I'm also saying is that I've said this for a while. Teens are very woke about mental health, aren't they? They know where to go. They know what to find. They teach me a thing or two, right? And what I actually have said for quite some time is I feel that some of our teens now struggling with their mental health because sometimes along the generations, other people haven't attended to their own mental health and it's filtered through. That makes sense?
Yeah, it does. So with the teens that you're working with at the moment, I suppose there must be such a large amount of different mental health struggles. And I know, just in the media recently, there was a lot of talk about Adolescence, the Netflix show, and
Mhm.
although it was a white family, there's an insight into actually teens and living almost in a different world.
Yeah.
Often parents don't know what's happening in their teens' life, and you sort of think, oh, they're just teenagers, they go quiet. Some people say boys go really quiet, girls get emotional and more talkative. I'm not sure if that's probably a stereotype, but we see things played out in the media that way, and there really seems to be going through a host of struggles at the moment. I mean, you've been working with teens for a couple of years, you've said. So how are you seeing things play out for them?
Yeah, so I've been working with teens for 4 years now, and it's more counselling actually in schools because it's short term. It's very much 6 sessions. It can be increased. Some of the things I've seen is just the uptake in social media. And whenever I talk about some of these concerns when it comes to teens, it's not all everything is bad. It's not all social media is bad. All mobile phones are bad. It's never like that. I think there's now unhealthy ways of using all of that. And the way social media is affecting young people has had a big impact. I've talked earlier about how the intergenerational trauma, parental mental health concerns, environment, cost of living, all of this is affecting teens. And I think one of the biggest, excuse me, one of the biggest things that teenagers find quite difficult at the moment is navigating relationships. Bullying is massive on there as well. Bullying, yes, we've had it for years. These teens don't get a break from it. There's so much expected of them because they can't just leave school at 3. School comes home with them because it's on their phone. The whole year group. I mean, my daughter was telling me that there's a WhatsApp group with the whole year group. I'm just like, no, just ignore that and do not be part of that because that's crazy. So it's navigating all of these different things that we as parents were never prepared for. When it comes to, so that's not even in with a South Asian perspective, because the acculturation gaps like we talked about before, we in Scotland, we do have quite a few immigrants into Scotland and they are having kids here. So that acculturation gap is quite big. And then their kids are on these phones and they don't know what's going on. It's like in Adolescence in one of the, did you watch the show? Did you watch it? Yeah. It's like in one of the shows where the words that he was in his room, he was at home safe. No, kids aren't safe on the internet. They're not. They might be doing very, very simple and basic stuff. But I always say this, I think if my husband and I, who were born in this country, we are the children of immigrants in this country, were born in this country and we struggle to navigate social media to keep our teens safe. How is somebody that's moved in from another country going to battle with it? That's where the conversations around adolescence became interesting for me, is in terms of how many people are out there from the South Asian background with teens and would even know what the manosphere meant.
And I think that shock value of that show gave me that there's something I need to be prepared for. I think that a lot of parents, every conversation I was having over those few weeks was, do we need to get more on top of this? Do we need to start learning more about what's going on out there? We need to start getting, more aware about phone usage, what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. I mean, my kids don't have phones yet, but my almost 10-year-old keeps asking. My almost 10-year-old is being told no, not at the right time. And then we'll toss up answer it. But I think, is it a case of parents having to be more informed, finding more education about what's going on?
No, I would definitely say so. I think like I said earlier, about we do the best we can, but then when we know better, we do better. And now this has come to light. And, it's, I've always been a bit of a helicopter parent. And I know in some ways from my own journey that sometimes I'm a bit too much of a helicopter parent. And that my daughter reminds me of that every day. She's nearly 14. So I remember it made me laugh when you talked about your 10-year-old wanting a phone. We had a whole weekend conversation about TikTok. We had to pause the conversation, go to bed, and then reconvene the next day. And this was when she was 10, because all her friends had it. And don't get me wrong, I've battled with it. Should I let her have it? Other parents have, but I had to go with my gut instinct. I had to go with my gut instinct. And I think as parents, we do need that bit more sort of, yes, we need to be navigating what our kids are navigating, having a look at what's happening for them, what they're experiencing, what they're understanding, meeting them where they're at. Because teen life is difficult. The adolescent brain, goodness, it goes through the biggest changes between 12 and 19. What is going on up there is phenomenal. And they are challenging everything. They're finding their own identity. They're exploring the world in different ways. And actually, if you think about it, it's such an important part of their life, because what they're doing is learning how to they're learning how to move away from us. Yeah. They're learning how to make and have relationships with other people and learn about the world and to move away from us, which is why I would never say mobile phones, know this, know that, because I would rather my children learn under the safety of their own roof. And I know that when they go out there, they know exactly what they're contending with, what they're dealing with. The internet can be a very scary, very dangerous place. And Bria, I mean, you said that some of these things you were learning for the first time when it came to mobile phones. And in a way, well, that's a good thing, because it hasn't come into your home. Because you would have, if when your daughters do get phones, you will. And there'll be time limits, and you'll have access to what they're looking at, or you'll be able to access their phone. We've only just stopped with my 18-year-old. We've only just stopped. And we kind of started letting go a little bit at 16. Because they need their freedom. Like I said, they need to be able to learn how to be in the world without us. So we started to let go then. We're not letting go with my daughter yet. So it was just about having a look at it. And so you'll have all that access. And so it was, in a way, there was a plus side that you hadn't heard of all of that, because you haven't seen her on your daughter's phone. They haven't got phones for you to see it
at the moment.
Yeah, but you do have the information now. And it's a lot of what I do with in terms of work with teens. I don't sit there with the view of getting them off their phones, because I can't do that. I have them for 50 minutes a week. There's not much I can do, but I can create an awareness around what these phones are doing, how they're affecting them, and to empower them to be able to speak with their parents about what is going on and what's happening and what they're experiencing. And same for us. We didn't see any of the stuff on my son's phone. They're not massive gamers, so they weren't constantly gaming and gaming with strangers and things like that. I could say I'm lucky that my children don't engage in that sort of thing. But I do a lot of that work with adults as well. If they've got teens themselves, I offer that approach as well, in terms of coming for therapy, because a lot of the work I do with mums especially is that sort of, sometimes they bring to me how they parent. And I'm not a parenting coach, because I think that we're all doing the best we can. But there are situations where they think, I could do this better. How can I manage this situation better? And when we've unpacked it, we've gone back to when they were kids and how they've experienced stuff and what particular situation experience has affected them. It's not always to do with the house. It's not always to do with the people in the house, or it's sometimes to do with the experiences outside of school. Or in school, sorry, not outside of school, but in school, and their sort of peers and teachers. Teachers have a massive influence. You know, I can still remember at 47 years old how one particular teacher made me feel when I was 10. So teachers have a massive, so it's all these little things that are sort of sitting in your nervous system that can show up at different times. So that is definitely something we do a lot of in the therapy room, so to speak.
There's a lot in there, isn't it, about that teen mind, and something that just hit home with what you were saying is that we want our children to be independent. We want our children to know how to survive in the world without us. Whereas I think some part of, say, previous generations in South Asian culture is very much you stay together with the family all the time. If it's not your own family, it will be your in-laws family, and having that protection always. I think that at some point there's a change, maybe come to this country of people wanting to move away, do things independently. But I think that collectivist culture sometimes, when we're growing up, we hear the messaging of, what will your in-laws say? You stay with your in-law. You've been when you're in, you do this and this, especially for women.
Yeah.
And then bringing up daughters, for me in particular, I know you've got a daughter as well, to say, actually, we're going to do this so that you're independent when you're older. That switch in mindset can be quite important as well.
Oh, definitely.
evolving parenthood from our parents' generation to our generation. There's a different, I'd say the difference in how we parent now and the issues coming up are very different as well.
Definitely. So it's like that breaking the cycle, isn't it? And I've seen I've seen a lot of heartbreaking situations where we've got a lot of family estrangement in the Asian culture, South Asian culture, where things haven't quite worked out between in-laws, daughter-in-law, son-in-law, whatever the case may be. And it's caused a huge rupture in the relationships. And as a result, some particular clients made them really, really question their own good enough, their own conditions of worth. Because I know for a long time that I've, kind of heard that message of wait until you're married, kind of that you need to make round roti so your mother-in-law likes them. And it's always about sort of impressing that in-law family, and so you're built with these conditions, and then all of a sudden, your in-laws, they're unhappy with you. And then the sort of the breakdown in those conditions that can be really detrimental to a person, to a South Asian female, because that's very much part of the narrative she has growing up. I can't speak from, I haven't worked with any South Asian men who have about this particular situation, but when you said about the individualistic and the collectivist culture, and I think that's something that South Asians can often struggle with, is finding their own identity. We're often quite enmeshed with our parents, an extension of them. And sometimes breaking that extension can feel really difficult because it feels like we're letting go of everything we know, but we don't have to. We just don't have to at all. It is there. Yeah, there's lots of roots, and I'm sure we can go on forever. So, but I'm conscious of time as well.
With this conversation, we could probably do another episode on this and speak in more depth. But it's been brilliant speaking to you. I think talking about culture, talking about support for South Asian women, highlighting that it's out there. If you need it, please do seek support. It doesn't have to be a topic that we keep undercover. I think the more conversations we have with friends, with family, just openly, if you are struggling, people should understand by now. I'm hoping that we've moved on enough to say, actually, what you're going through is valid and seek help from it. Seek help from a specialist. Talking to friends and family is one thing, letting people know, having that support around you, but do seek help from a therapist will be what I would want to say to someone if they came to me.
Mm-hmm.
And also then the teen conversation, which I think probably does need a whole session in itself again. Mm-hmm. There'll be a lot of parents listening, perhaps even people like me with younger children thinking, this is all to come. What do I need to do? Just getting prepared with it, doing better. And just identifying we are where we are. Our parents were where they were, having that understanding. I think that's one thing I'm really coming away from today, doing the best we can. Majority of parents are like that, have that mindset. So really just continue asking questions and improving where we can. But thank you so much for having this conversation and raising those topics with me today.
You're very welcome. Thank you, Priya. Thank you for having me.